Peace to everybody. I hope all is well in this warmish, kind of coldish day. In between, we're going to get it started. Now, in the spirit of schools, for those who are just attendees, we are encouraging you to come to the front more so you can get more of the experience, be closer to people. I don't want to be that type of teacher to call people out, but if you're willing and able, come to the front. And again, welcome to Central High School. My name is Andre Kennedy. I'm one of the co-chairs of the DEO Disparities Education Outcomes Task Force or Steering Committee. My other co-chair, Jared Crew, will be on his way. So welcome again, and I'm not going to be too long. It's just that this is an important meeting for a number of reasons. We'll have our glorious first semester with Bob Thomas coming close to an end, so you'll be hearing from him, you'll be hearing from a whole bunch of other people, and most importantly, we want to hear from you. And once we hear from you, we're going to have some action steps, because I'm not in the business of just talking and just stuff that's going to the wind. We're all about work here, okay? So, y'all ready to work?
Yeah.
I know y'all ready. Are y'all ready to work?
Yeah.
All right, good. So I'll kick it off to Bob Thomas.
Thank you, Andre. Bob Thomas, Knox County School Superintendent, and I think we just have one board member here. I want to always recognize our board members. Mrs. Patty Downs, who is our board chair, is with us this evening, so I certainly appreciate having you being with us. Thank you very much, and thank you, Andre, for the work that you do, and also our other co-chair, Mr. Jerry Crew. They do a great job of chairing the steering committee and done a lot of great work. I've been around now for 7 months, just in this position. Been around a lot longer than that in other positions. But since I've been in this position, we've been talking about 3 priorities. Those are increase student achievement, create a positive culture, and eliminate disparities. And so that's what we've been working on and focusing on the last 7 months, and that's what the committee's been working on. Each one of those sort of supports and affects the other, as you might be able to determine. So the steering committee's done a lot of great work, and we've made progress. Do we have more progress to make? Absolutely. We've had a lot more progress to make, and you'll be hearing about some of those things this evening. What we want you to do this evening is just be real thoughtful, real candid. We want to hear what you have to say. We want to hear what you're thinking, and we want your help in terms of helping us to eliminate disparities in our school district. So, and I'm going to be very brief so we can get started. So, having said all of that, I will turn control of the program over to Miss Missy Massey, who's our Executive Director for Support Services. Missy.
Good evening. We're really glad that you're here. So I'm going to just kind of give you an overview of kind of our plan for this evening. Both myself and Steve Rudder, who is with our research department, we're going to review some data. We're going to give you some updates on some of the major initiatives that were the goals that were established by the Disparities in Educational Outcome Task Force to kind of give you a pulse point on where we are on different initiatives. And then Ms. Jeannie Delaney will come up and give you some further directions. We're going to move from this space to a smaller space so that we can have some more intimate conversations about the topics that we're talking about tonight, because one of the reasons that we're here is not only to share information from you, but as Mr. Thomas and Andre have shared, that we really want to hear from you. Where do you see some of our successes? Where do you see some things that you would still like to continue for us to emphasize, to concentrate and emphasize? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Rudder.
Hey everybody. Like Missy said, my name's Steve Rudder, and I work in the Research and Evaluation Department here at Knox County Schools. And Missy asked me to come speak to you guys tonight because I put together data for the DEO committee twice a year. Once in December, or really in January after the first semester ends, and then once in June. So the data I'll be going over tonight is from the end of last year. It goes through the whole year last year, and then we'll be doing this again shortly, like in another month or so. So some of the things I'm going to go over tonight is just an overall view of the demographic landscape in Knox County schools, And we'll talk about some suspension information, disaggregated in a variety of ways, then a little bit of statistical analysis by subgroup, and then Missy is going to talk a little bit about the arrest data that we get from our law enforcement partners. So I know this is probably difficult to see back there. So the 3 bars on the right-hand side, those are the ethnic composition of our Knox County Schools student body for the last 3 years. So the green bar represents the proportion of students that are that identify in the white category. The gray segments represent our Hispanic students, and the orange segment represents our black students, and the light blue at the very bottom are our Asian students. So one of the reasons why I had this slide included was because I wanted to point out really the only segments that are growing over time are the gray ones, and so our Hispanic population is growing, and it's growing faster than our other subgroups. So when we look at suspensions, the orange bars are for school year 15-16, and the blue bars are for school year 16-17, which was last year. So you can see that overall, we had a decreased usage of suspension as a disciplinary measure last year compared to the year before, and that decrease happened at each grade band, at the elementary, middle, and high levels. So you can also notice from this graph that most of the decreases happened in the middle school grade bands. So if we divide this data up, let me stop. I wanted to pause for a minute and to make sure everybody knows what we're looking at on this slide. So these counts on this slide are counts of disciplinary events, right? So we're not counting people, we're counting disciplinary events. So for example, if a middle school student was suspended 4 times last year, they would be counted 4 times in that blue bar. Does that make sense? Okay. We'll do that in a minute too. Yeah, we're just a couple different ways of looking at it. Yeah. All right. So if we divide this data up in a little different way, so this is divided up by in-school, the type of suspension, by in-school or out-of-school suspension. So on the left-hand side, you have the in-school suspensions. The right-hand side are out-of-school suspensions. So you can see there was decreases in both types of suspensions, but the lion's share of it happened through the decreased use of in-school suspension. So now we're switching. So this table that I put up here is this. We are no longer counting disciplinary incidents. We're counting students on this one. So these are our students who have at least one in-school suspension, and it's disaggregated by subgroup. So if you go down through there, you can see that we had decreases in the green ones are decreases. We had decreases across most subgroups. 2 notable exceptions to that are our Hispanic students and EOL students. And then the picture looks pretty similar for our out-of-school suspensions. The increase in the Hispanic student and the EOL students wasn't quite as severe, but there was still a little bit of an uptick there. All right, so one way researchers measure disparities when we're looking at these kinds of things is that we calculate a risk index. That's not the only way, but it's one way that a lot of academic researchers do it. So what we're doing with the risk index is we're comparing the proportion of students inside a subgroup that have, in our case, a suspension, and we're comparing that to the proportion of that subgroup across the entire student body, right? So it's really a division problem. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. So let's say, for example, 55% of our students with a suspension are economically disadvantaged, but 45% of our entire student body are considered economically disadvantaged. So to calculate that risk index, we would divide those two numbers, and that would be a 1.2. So the interpretation of the risk index would be anything greater than 1 is a flag for disparity, right? So if it's exactly equal to 1, that means the the proportion of students inside the pool of students with suspension mirrors our student body as a whole. If it's less than 1, that means that group is underrepresented. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes, sir. Right. This is at a district level. We're looking at it. Yeah. Yeah. So we have we send out reports each month to every principal at every school that has this by school too. So it's interesting. It's very different in different places. I think it makes more sense at the district level if we're looking at it from a district perspective. So I don't know. We do look at it. I don't have it available. Do it? Yeah.
So we do look at it at the district level for these purposes, and for us who are monitoring what our work looks like from the district perspective. At the school level, we have those conversations. Mr. Trent is one of our supervisors for the secondary level. They build that into, they're responsible for having those conversations at the school level. They're looking at their data, they're setting their goals. One of the things that, as you know, is an emphasis is eliminating disparities. So they're using that data to set their goals, and that's how they're progress monitoring, how they're meeting those goals.
Does that help? Okay. Okay, so if I do those calculations, and on this, that's what this graph shows. And so the blue bars are for school year 14-15, the orange bars are for 15-16, and the gray bars are for last year. So the thing that immediately sticks out on this is our black students are overrepresented within our in-school suspensions. So like the proportion of students that have in-school suspensions, the black students are about twice what their population proportion is. So I think our African American population is somewhere in the neighborhood of 17%. So that means about 34% of the students have an in-school suspension. And one other thing on this one too, earlier I said that our Hispanic population was increasing, and we also increased our in-school suspensions within that subgroup. And so the fact that this index ticked up a tenth of a point, what that shows is that increase of assignment of in-school suspension is outpacing our increase in population, right? So, and it's a similar picture for out-of-school suspension. So again, the thing that really sticks out here are our African-American students are being overrepresented in terms of being suspended. So taking all this together, the overall kind of message from this is we have decreased the use of suspension across the district, but what's happened is we're decreasing it among almost every subgroup. So what that means is we're still suspending certain subgroups more often. We're just suspending everybody less often, if that makes any kind of sense at all. So, so we still acknowledge that we do have disparities, especially among African American students, students with disabilities, and economically disadvantaged students. And then we have looked at data for this school year in particular, and it was a preliminary look. And so it looks like that trajectory of decreased use of suspensions is continuing into this year, and we'll know better when we do our big data pool in December again. So, and I'm going to turn it over to Missy now. Thank you all. Yes. Missy's going to talk about that in just a minute. Yeah.
So I do want to go back and just highlight something he said. I do think one of our important messages is that we are increasing just the skill set of our staff and building those relationships and having different types of alternatives. So we're seeing across the board a decrease in our suspensions, which is very good news to us. We are, and for those of you who are not following along on this journey very regularly, we have schools that are at different places in the training because we're a very large district. So we've got schools that have been using PBIS and restorative practices for a couple of years now. And so those are some of our schools where we're seeing our biggest decreases. So we know that the things that we're doing are working, but we also realize we still have some more work to do. So one of the role that I'm serving tonight is I'm going to highlight some of the major initiatives or some of the major recommendations from the DEO task force, starting with a couple of new positions that exist in our school district, and one of them is our ombudsman position, and I'm looking around. Oh, Miss Tammy Campbell is outside. Miss Tammy Campbell and Sue Ownby. Tammy is the district-wide ombudsman. She's taking lots and lots of parent calls and staff referrals, et cetera, and she works with all of our schools, and she's a very busy lady. She's working on lots of different issues, and she's here this evening, so if you would like to touch base with her, please feel free to do that. Sue Ownby is here somewhere too. I don't see her. She's probably also outside. They're outside tending to things. But she's focused primarily on working with families from students with disabilities. She has a background. She was a parent advocate for many years prior to coming with the school system, so she has a lot of experience in that role. Another thing that the DEO task force asked to review was what was our human resources strategy for making sure that we had a lot of diversity, that the level of diversity in our workforce matched the diversity in our schools, because we don't have as many Hispanic and African American teachers as our student ratio is, and what are we doing to actively work on that? And so we have hired a talent acquisition and retention specialist. That's Ms. Brooke Denard Rosser. She's I guess she's got a little bit of something here at Central because her husband is the football coach, so we'll give a shout out for Central. Is Mr. Lambert still in the room? That was just for you, JD. Cultural competency. If you are with us at our December board meeting or you tune in, you will see there will be a contract for a vendor for our cultural competency. We plan to start that training in January. We have taken a look at our data, and we've looked at our academic data, and we've looked at our suspension and discipline data, and we've prioritized schools, and several of those schools will start training on our January in-service date. We have a date in February. It'll be about a 2.5-year cycle before we get everybody trained, but we do have a very specific plan and a strategy around that, but that will start in January, pending our board votes approval on the contract that's on the December agenda. Our MOU, which is a memorandum of understanding, which is the thing that kind of dictates or governs the work between the school system and our law enforcement partners. We have law enforcement, either county or city policemen, in all of our middle and high schools and in some of our elementary schools. And there is a memorandum of understanding that kind of outlines what the roles are. We maintain a really positive working relationship in our schools with our law enforcement partners, and that we've been working on a revision of that document for a long period of time, and we have that almost ready to go. I don't think you'll see it on the December agenda, but hopefully after the first of the year. We've done a number of things. Our Stop School Push Out friends made a recommendation of a national expert, Judge Teskey. We sent our document to Judge Teskey. He reviewed that document. He does a lot of national presentations around memorandums of understanding between school districts and law enforcement. He made some recommendations. We've made all of those. Some folks from our Stop School Push Out friends have been and reviewed the document, and we've got some additional tweaks, and we hope to have that either on the January or February board agenda. Student Advisory Council, one of the recommendations is that we look at making sure that we're hearing student voice. So we have met once. We have representatives from all of our high schools, 2 or 3 representatives. We met here at Central's the place to be. We met here at Central a few weeks ago. We're going to be shifting them around. They'll be attending some of our disparities in education steering committees to kind of have that student voice. And Kinley, our school board representative, is working with that group as well, so she'll be able to bring that information back to the school board, so that just all of that volume of student voice we feel like is really critical. Our discipline policies, we spent quite a bit of time with a group of school folks and community members and school people, parents, and student input into looking at what our current discipline policies are. We are continuing those conversations. We're in the process of having after-school teacher meetings to get teacher input. We're doing some more listening sessions from our students. We are having some additional meetings with our principals, and our discipline committee will be meeting in December and January, because in February we will be bringing back those policies with the recommendations for any types of changes that have been recommended by all of those different groups, and that will happen at our February board meeting. Restorative interventionists, one of the things that we talked about one of the recommendations was that we needed to look at two things. The task force spent a lot of time reviewing national models on successful ways to provide positive environments for children, and to also look at practices that reduce suspensions overall and certainly reduce the disparities. And the two things that we are focused on in Knox County School is positive behavior interventions and support, PBIS, and also restorative practices. We're well beyond 2/3 of the way full of all of our schools having the at least tier 1 or initial training for our PBIS, and so by the end of this summer 18, we will have all of our schools trained in PBIS and see those strategies implemented in all of our schools. Restorative practices, we probably have about 1/4 of our schools that have had at least the first level of the first day or 2 days of training for restorative practices, and that's something that we will continue probably over the next 2 to 3 years to look at really effectively having all of our schools trained to the level of enough of the staff having that training to be really effective in implementation of that. So you'll see that as part of our board policy. And then the last thing is that we would provide opportunities to hear from you and to give you an opportunity to see what our data is. And so we'll have another one of these meetings in the spring and that will be from our first semester data from this year. So hopefully you'll be watching for that information and you'll join us when we meet in the spring. Just for your information, here's contact, and again, if you can find all of these people on our website, this is the contact information for Tammy, Sue, and Brooke Rosser, who is our talent acquisition and retention specialist. Oh, just a little bit more detail. This tells you just what I told you about the PBIS training, where we are as far as getting all of our schools trained. Same thing for restorative practices, where we are in getting all of our schools trained. Here's a few highlights from the 17-18 school year. We have started to look at our data, so I just wanted to kind of share some highlights. Southdale Middle School, Northwest, Fulton High, West High have recorded fewer suspensions in the school year 17-18 to this point than either of the 2 previous years. And the reason we're talking about those schools those are some of our schools that we have that are trained in some of the practices that I talked to you about just a second ago, and we see implementation going very well. Kind of just keying into West High School, they have 400 fewer discipline referrals up to this point than they did in the school year 16-17. And we think that's really significant. That's 400 less kids getting written up for something. Those behaviors are being dealt with by teachers in classrooms. Both Central, we're here at Central, and Fulton have recorded 200 fewer discipline referrals. Again, those students, we've increased strategies. We've worked on those proactive things that we can do for students in the classroom, so we're seeing less discipline. And then thinking about, I will mention to you, everybody's very interested in when students are arrested at school. When students are arrested at school, it's for something that's very egregious, but those things, when we look at our arrest numbers, there are 10 fewer arrests compared to this first 2 months of school this year than there were last year. So we feel like that's a direct result of some of the strategies that we're implementing. One of the questions we get is how many total arrests, and this school year, if you'll see the total, we've got them divided in. The blue is school year 15-16, school year 16-17 is in the orange, and school year 17-18 is in the gray. And you can see we've had fewer arrests when you look at the total down here for the entire school year. And we've got those divided out into the African American, Caucasian, Hispanic. I will note that we've seen a decrease across the board, so we're real pleased with that. And I want to say, I can't do that, I think that we had a total of 72 arrests out of our 60,000 kids last year on school campus. There could be of students who are arrested outside of school, but when we talk about arrests that happen on campus at school. All right, so that concludes the data portion, and Ms. Jeannie Delaney, we know you want to talk about some of this information, and we have some small group sections that we're going to have some dialogue about all of these things, and then all of us will be available should you have questions or need additional information.
Good evening, everyone. So we know that one of the best ways to make sure that everyone gets heard and asks their questions and expresses their concerns is in smaller groups than the large group. So let me ask first, are there any folks that would prefer, and you probably don't even understand what I'm saying right now, to be in a Spanish-speaking group? Okay, all right. Because we had facilitators for that. What about students? Are there some students in the group that would like to? I'm sorry? No, I just said they probably wouldn't. Corral, do you want to interpret?
¿Hay alguna persona que prefiere participar en un grupo en el que se hable en español?
Okay, are there anyone here that would, any of our students, middle or high? We had facilitators for a student group. All right. So here's the plan. We're going to have 2 small groups. And the facilitators will lead you to the room where you'll have a chance, like I said, to share your thoughts, and they will be scribed. So we'll have everything written up, and it'll all go back to the steering committee and to the superintendent. So if you have a name tag that is numbered 1 through 14, you're going to go with group 1. So there's Kathy. She'll be out in the commons area. Okay, everybody hang on just one quick second. So I've just got one more thing to say. If you have a badge 15 to 28, you're going to go with group 2, which is Doug right up there. So now you may go, and the rest of y'all, if you want to sit in on those small groups, otherwise you are welcome to go.
Welcome back. We're going to go ahead and get started, and this section, I guess it's kind of informal. We do have a mic. We're going to need you to talk into the mic so that the recording will pick it up, because we'll put this on our website when we're done. Again, I'm Melissa Massey. I'm the Executive Director of Student Support Services, and a lot of the work around the educational outcome assignments fall under my area of responsibility, if not me directly, some people that work with me in support. Tammy Campbell is our ombudsman, and she's going to be one of our folks up here answering questions. Jeffrey Wright is a student support services supervisor who works with specifically our PBIS, restorative practices. He's a person that does a lot of our training and does a lot of our behavior supports, and he's working in schools every single day supporting children who need some additional behavior supports. And then you've already heard from Stephen Rutter, who works with our Research and Accountability Office, and he's the person that's helping us look at all of our data. That's not all he does. He has a lot of other data kinds of things, but so if you ask your questions, one of us, depending on who might, and it may be more than one of us that will have some input into that, but we'll just open it up, and one of our, Abby over there has the mic to bring to you. If you have questions, feel free to get started.
Courtney Shea, one of our concerns we talked about was that the way we understand restorative practices is being implemented is that a core group of people are getting a short training, and then are expected to train back at their schools. And don't the other people in the schools really need a certified trainer in addition to, in order for them to be fully trained?
You want to take that?
Yeah, so we are taking a core group of, staff from each building, and yeah, they are going back and relaying some of the information, giving the information back to the rest of the staff at whatever level. We have several schools that are implementing at different levels, and then I'm going out and providing some additional support and training for schools that maybe they'd ask for it. So, but I guess your question is, do they need a certified trainer? I mean, yeah, well, I'm a certified trainer, so.
So, and the core group of people, and we have schools that have different things going on. Like he just did a training at South Dole this week for day 1 and 2 with another core group of teachers, and they've been trained. But yes, we are using a train the trainer model, and we're doing some follow-up work around that. But again, we're in the very early implementation stage of restorative practices versus where we are with PBIS.
And the idea is that we would continue this in the summer for schools to continue to send more and more staff through trainings in the summer, or even during the school year, like I did at South Dole this past week. I think I had 30 additional staff from South Dole High School, South Dole Middle School, and we brought a couple from Northwest Middle School as well. So we'll continue to do sessions like that as well.
And we have some schools that are using their own funding to get additional training. So we have some schools that have all of their staff trained.
I was about to ask, do teachers who get the training in the summer get paid for that time, or is it just in service?
Yeah, it's primarily in service. I'm not sure if some schools have funds to pay a stipend. That I don't know, but.
And some of the schools have extended contracts, but most of it's in service time.
How many certified trainers do we have in the district?
So myself, and then we have
5 at Fulton.
5 or 6 at Fulton High School. So which we could tap into and use in the future in the summers, and they did a training actually there at the beginning of the school year. And they brought a couple schools went over there and did the training with them as well. So,
And we're going to send a couple of folks this year to get some additional training. So we're increasing our group of trainers every year.
I'd like to follow up with what Courtney was saying a minute ago. I think the real question is, does every person that is required to have the training has that training from the expert, not hand-me-downs 2 or 3 layers, but from the experts? Yeah. That's the question. You may have, 20,000 people or something, but if you break them up in these groups like you're talking and have 5 trainers and then they train and they go back and they train and they go back and they train, you're going to lose a lot. I mean, I think you know that.
Yeah.
So the question is, how can you resolve that? How can you fix that? The best way to get training is to get it from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
So we have a long-range training plan, and we are working very specifically around how do we maximize that training for all of our staff, and we're doing that surface level training for some folks, and then the follow-up training. We're 92 schools, and we have 6 trainers. So at this point, when we look at the resources that we have available, we're really trying to maximize those, and we'll continue to work with that and work through that schedule.
And I think that schools can get some of the information from the people that say, I would train that core team going back. But again, like you said, in the summertime or even during the school year, some schools can allow me to come out and get subs, and we can start training, I guess from the horse's mouth. They can get it from me on those 2-day trainings during the school year. So again, long-range plan, that'd be ideal for them to have it.
And I think one of the things, ideally, we agree with you. We would like to have everybody in the school trained. We are working towards that, and we will continue to work on that as all of our resources allow. But I can tell you that our evidence shows us that using the model that we're using, it's making an impact. We know that maybe it would make more of an impact, but we're definitely thinking, our evidence shows us that what we're doing is making positive changes in what's happening in our schools. And so maybe not the most ideal, but definitely a positive step in making sure, because we've trained our principals, we're training our restorative interventionists, we're training those core groups of teachers, and then continuing to provide ongoing support to those schools. And that's why we're trying to be systematic in how many schools that we train, because we do have limited resources on how much support. That's why it's a little bit slower. And when you've maybe heard me talk to the board, I've said, I don't know that with the resources we have, we're going to meet that 3-year having all of our schools trained, but we want to do it well rather than trying to rush through that.
I've brought this up before, and it's about the numbers that we see. And it seems like the numbers are there that would show us by school what suspensions in school, suspensions out of school, suspensions. It seems like where we have restorative justice happening and PBIS, it would be good to start having some numbers out of that as far as students who have participated in that. It seems like gender preference should be shown. So it just seems like if we've got a problem like disparities, then we need all the information. And I would think that it's there. And it looks like, I mean, there may be a disparities according to gender. I mean, and so what is that about? It just seems like all those, that information is important, but we're getting huge numbers with huge groups, but it doesn't break down. And parents, it seems like, would like to know what schools are doing what,
So I will respond on the big piece of that, and then maybe, Stephen, if you have anything you want to add. When we look at the global numbers of the information that we share, sometimes when you're looking at finite groups, it becomes possible to identify or figure out specific children, and we have a responsibility to make sure that we protect that information, especially if it's a school that has a very small population of students. So there's that piece. We always have to maintain confidentiality of students. So when we look at that data from the global standpoint, there's not any of that kind of risk that we have to worry about. So that's one of the reasons when we report out, we do it from the global sense. But we are providing that information to schools. They're setting very specific goals. And in disparities reporting in the past, we've talked about high schools and middle schools that have higher disparities, and I think we could probably provide that information without drilling down real specifically that might have any protective information at risk.
Yeah, I think that was well said. And but as far as like gender, we could definitely include that going forward. That's what that would be. You're right. It's definitely there. And it would be a relatively easy thing to include going forward, and I'll do that.
Yeah.
Sorry. I forgot my question. Okay. If I can understand right, so let's say it's a small school with 300 people in it, 300 students. So to give out numbers about in-school suspensions and out-of-school suspensions, and let's say we did have numbers about people who use restorative practices, that would be sensitive or problematic?
Just when you're drilling down to numbers of incidents within a subgroup, sometimes that information can become identifiable for some people. Maybe not you who has no relationship with a specific school, but giving those numbers could compromise the confidentiality of some students.
And I'm trying to understand, because I'm all for privacy. Who decides that?
about the confidentiality.
About where, and it gets down
What
to
the
that
threshold
level
is.
that you're afraid that it's...
That would not be me. I rely on my friends in the Research and Accountability Office who understand statistics and numbers, which is way above my head.
Yeah, we have some, I don't know if they're out there on the website or not, but we do have, like, I don't sit on that committee, but like when we get research requests from outside entities, like there are guidelines involved, like certain numbers, like you can't, they won't go below a certain threshold.
Other questions?
No, it's for the recording.
And I'm sorry if this was discussed in one of the groups. I stayed outside and have my own little special group. But what can you tell us about cultural competency? I mean, I know that it's going to be brought up to the school board, but can you explain a little bit how the training is going to look like?
I'm going to hand that over to Tammy Campbell because she's the person who chaired the team that looked at the most recent. I don't think we're ready to share the vendor, but the process is good.
We just completed the RFP. We had to go through that process, and the committee, which was a five-person committee, did the evaluation and scored, and we've turned in a recommendation for the vendor from the group that was presented to us. So the dates have already been set. If everything goes according to schedule and the board votes on accepting the vendor that is recommended from the committee, that we're due to start training our staff, and that is all certified staff, administrators, support staff, and our security, Knox County School Security, will be a part of that training process. Now, know that it's progressive because it is over almost 7,000 employees in total that will receive the cultural competency training. What the vendors that applied in the proposals all had to submit what the first year would look like, which would be a face-to-face. It was no train-the-trainer model we were doing. You have to be able to have that capacity. So we will start training in January, if all goes well, and go through a rotation of schools throughout the summer as first year. And by the end of the summer, everyone should be on that first full day. And then we have one full day, and then we have half-day trainings that are designated for support staff, such as our cafeteria, our school secretaries, and clerical. And custodians, yes, ma'am. So they will be included in that half-day training, which will take place this first year. And so we have a calendar. I can give you more information in terms of our schedule among our the rollout in terms of schools, and it will be simultaneously happening. So it'll be a lot of training going on. All schools will be fully immersed, and their support staff as well for this first round.
And just so you know, we prioritized, we looked at, I mentioned this when I presented earlier, but I'll say it one more time. We looked at, and by we, I really mean Stephen, looked at our academic data and our data regarding suspensions, both ISS and out of school, and we prioritized the list based on, you know, where we felt like we needed to target that training first, and so it's happening in that order.
Thank you. You mentioned a minute ago that there were 7,000 individuals to be trained. In this first round, will there be 7,000 people trained in the first round?
In terms of employees, yes. That includes certified staff, administrators, support staff, school resource officers, custodians, classified. So it is. So they'll be in a combination of one day. The full day training will be for those certified staff, those administrators, resource officers, those people who are directly school classroom. And then support staff will receive half-day training that will help support. And so they're all kind of on the same page around the cultural competency and responsiveness, the biases, the different things. All that's included within that we'll touch a little on restorative practice just as a connector, but that's not what it's about. It's about cultural competency, getting helping our staff have reflective opportunity to see where there are biases that we have, because we all do have them. And so looking into that and looking at the different populations and sort of how we respond to that culturally. And in addition to some other things, I'm trying to sort of summarize it and nutshell it.
Okay, just one more thing. Of that 7,000, they're going to get the full 1 day. Now, you mentioned culture competencies. Does that include implicit bias training?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
We probably have time for just one more.
Sure.
What do you need to get more certified trainers for restorative practices?
So I have some funds where I'm sending for some additional trainers. We have, one of the things is access to teachers. I mean, we have over 7,000 staff, 4,000 of those are certified teachers. So when you think about the access to teachers, either we're working through in-service days or summers, or we're looking at a large number of subs. And when you think about just the logistics of taking that many people out of the school during a school day, that becomes very complicated. So one of our most challenging resources is time. So we're continuing to work on that piece of it. And then, again, we're doing cultural competency training. We're trying to do restorative practices. And, oh, by the way, we have new standards. So there's a lot of things on teachers' plates. So trying to get all of those conflicting things scheduled so that we can get all of it done. Also, again, that resource of time. It's like we never talked, Todd.
Well,
hi, I'm Missy Massey. Nice to meet you.
We should say, and it doesn't get said, that the parameters about on all these trainings is our budget. Because if the budget was, I mean, if we put priority on something first, we have to do that. And there are some priorities that have been expressed here. But then when you go back to the budget and you have the school going on every day and all the needs the school has, and so, okay, where do these people come from that are supposed to fix what we have a problem of? And I always felt like at some point we had to say, and I wish the school board would be a little bit more upfront and forward about saying, that is our problem, and maybe it's not normal for them to encourage the citizenry to realize that, and we know that's where it's got to come from. The school board can't just get its budget changed, but it can support a bigger budget. But the citizenry has to come out and get the Knox County to do that, or to find money within the existing budget. So I just guess there is a ceiling here on what they can do on the existing budget that we have, because these trainings should involve a whole lot more trainers than they have, and they will have for cultural competency. And it's not ideal, but the budget, the money has got to come from somewhere. So that's all.
So I would, and again, I don't know if anybody else will say anything about that. I will tell you that yes, if we were to, when we talk about doing the implementation district-wide, it is an expensive venture. I mean, it is. But I will also say that, we have some constraints of where our budget is, but I can tell you that the things that, as the person who's really tried to prioritize and get feedback from the group, the things that I asked for in the budget set aside for the cultural competency, the restorative interventionist, that was an increase in salary. I mean, I did several asks, and all of those Mr. Thomas and the board granted. And I feel, would I like more? Certainly, but everything I asked for in order to do that phase 1 of implementation has happened. So, again, you as community members, obviously, there's all of those things. I've been very honest. When we think about we need more social workers, more counselors, more support staff, that without a doubt. But the things that when I can I honestly stand before you and say, do I feel like this superintendent and this board have made this a priority and taken resources that we have available and maybe even pulled resources from some other areas and directed them this way? I 100% can say that with good faith and good confidence. Other questions? Yes, sir. Thank you. Is that for me?
Thank you. Are you entertaining questions about MOUs and other topics?
So, how much time do we have? I think we are about to wrap because.
Okay.
One question, Carl.
I'll make this one. Encourage you to, when you do your culture competency and implicit bias, that the sheriff's troops and the city policemen get that same training, specifically in implicit bias as it relates to culture competency, because they're right out there on the front.
Okay.
They're on the front line, so they certainly need to clear those screens up too.
I know that the police and the sheriff's, the city and the county officers do have some very specific training. I can get you information about what that is. So they're probably a little bit ahead of the game in that they've already done some of that very directed training versus us just now starting in January. I will. All right. We very much appreciate you coming out tonight. We will have another one of these in the spring. Please tell some of your friends, because although this has been great conversation and we've loved this intimate time with you, this is really important stuff, and it really does take a village, and we appreciate you, and we would love to have more folks here. Have a great evening and a safe trip home.